DeVore School of Charm, but in those days it was called the Lauderdale School of Charm in Harlem. I was 15 years old, 1954. Wow. I graduated from the charm school. I think it was an 8-week course. And guess who the part-time receptionist was? None other than Diane Carroll. She was the part-time receptionist. I was very fortunate to have some fabulous women around me. Bea Richards taught me how to walk, how to sit, how to enter a room. And Bea Richards was Sidney Poitier's mother in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, in case you didn't know. Then Ophelia DeVore, we could go to the Grace Del Marco Model Agency. So that was the next step. After going to the charm school, then finishing high school, I joined the Grace Del Marco Model Agency. My very first job, I'll never forget that, was for Willie Mays. It was Willie Mays Day. It was Willie Mays Day, and that was all, I remember the date, August the 8th, 1954. That was my first paid job. It was wonderful. We had so much fun. I met Willie Mays, I met Monty Irving. That's when he was with the Giants at the Polo Grounds. So I did that job, and then we did more fashion show work. I didn't do as much print work. I wasn't a print model. I was a fashion show model, and I did do some print jobs with Ebony magazine. And I remember a Camel cigarette ad. That's when they used to have cigarette ads. I think they still do. I did a Camel cigarette ad, and I did a few ads. I think of Ballantine beer. I still have some of those posters. So, but I always liked fashion. I majored in art. So I was an art major at the High School of Music and Art. And then I went on to City College. And from City College, I took some courses at NYU. It's just been a fabulous float. I worked at Bloomingdale's. I was a model assistant at Bloomingdale's. From Bloomingdale's, I went to Lane Bryant. Lane Bryant, I was the model, the size 14 tall model. And then I became the buyer of hosiery. And that was very good. From hosiery, I did very well in the hosiery business because, believe it or not, back in 1960, whatever that was, or 62, stockings went to pantyhose. So it was a whole new way we ladies had to look. No more garter belts and stockings. It became pantyhose. So I took over the hosiery department, and then I added many stores wanted the pantyhose, not, stockings. But before that, I used to work for Lena Horne. I worked for Lena Horne Cosmetic Company, and first time I was ever on an airplane, I had to get on an airline, TWA, to go to St. Louis, Missouri. I'll never forget that because everybody knows St. Louis, Missouri for the arch to the west. Well, I got to St. Louis before they had the arch. I'll never forget that. We worked at Euclid Avenue, and I traveled for Miss Lena Horne. I went to Memphis, I went to Atlanta, I went to Miami. Oh, wow. It was a fabulous job. Then I went to, as I said, then it was Bloomingdale's. And after Bloomingdale's, it was Lane Bryant. Then I got married. I got married in 1969. I lived in Chicago for a short time. And the marriage wasn't working out. And so I decided I needed to find a job because I really didn't work while I was married and living in Chicago. I was married to a physician. And a friend of mine was the private secretary to John H. Johnson of Ebony Magazine and Johnson Publishing Company. Her name was LaDoris, and I said, LaDoris, you have to get me an interview with Eunice Johnson because I could be the commentator for the Ebony Fashion Fair. This is 1970. And lo and behold, she gets me an invite and an appointment to meet with Eunice Johnson. Well, the day they had me to meet with Eunice Johnson, they were also interviewing models to see which models they were going to have in the Ebony Fashion Fair. And while I was there, Mr. Johnson said, well, just start, doing commentary about the various models, whatever you see. And they loved what I was saying. Boom, hired immediately. They hired me. So I told them, and they wanted me to go to Europe the next week or two, because she was on her way to Europe for couture. And I said, I can't, because I'm in the middle of trying to get a divorce. And they knew who my husband was, because, Chicago's, everybody knew everybody. And they wanted to hire me. And I said, well, I'm going to call my old boss so you can have some recommendations. So I just got on the phone right there, and I called Mr. Paley, who was my boss at Lane Bryant, and he talked to Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson said, well, tell me a little bit about Audrey. He said, well, if you don't hire Audrey, we want her back. And that was it. Mr. Johnson said, fine, you're hired. They were going to hire me anyway, but the recommendation was my other boss said they wanted me to come back, and that's nice. And that's how I started with the Ebony Fashion Fair, and I did that for 7 years. Wow. On a Greyhound bus, we traveled all over the United States doing fashion shows. When I started, it was the 13th annual Ebony Fashion Fair, and I stayed 7 years. So when I left, it was the 19th annual Ebony Fashion Fair. I traveled to Europe with Mrs. Johnson twice a year, first class, one time to Concord. We stayed in the best hotels. We ate at the best restaurants. I mean, she treated herself royally, and which meant I got treated royally too. So, and while I was there, I knew I couldn't be there for my entire life. So what did I do? I saved my money. I was very, very good about saving money. In fact, I just lived on my expense account, because I had an expense account. They hadn't had a commentator before who had an expense account. I told them I needed an expense account, and that's what I did. I lived on that expense account. And so that when I turned 40 in 1977, I started my business. I had saved $60,000. I'll never forget that. And I spent that $60,000. When I think about it, I think it took me about 3-4 months. I spent it. I can't believe how, you don't know how naive I was. I'm not going to say that other word, starts with an S, but I was really naive. I had to have wall-to-wall carpeting. I had to have blinds. I spent money on the most ridiculous things. Then I went to Europe, and I went first class as if Mr. Johnson was paying for it. I forgot I was paying for it. And my American Express card was, oh, God. And I managed. I managed. I figured out you can't do that, because now I'm not making any money. I'm just starting my business, because when you first start a business, you're not making any money. You have an idea, you want to see if it works, and I wanted to produce fashion shows. But before I wanted to produce fashion shows, I had a little atelier, and I was selling these fabulous clothes from Europe that I got very inexpensively. And I was selling them inexpensively because they were designer clothes, but then my friends couldn't afford designer clothes. Everybody wanted to wear designer clothes. I wore designer clothes because I worked for Ebony, and I was on the international best dressed list. So I thought my friends wanted the same thing at a discount. That's how I could wear designer clothes. I got them at a discount, a real good discount, because they liked me. But when I was trying to sell some of the clothes here at the atelier, very few people could afford them. I didn't realize that. Oh, that was another thing. I didn't realize that, but that's okay. I went on from there, and I wanted to produce fashion shows. Well, I knew all the designers in New York, and I wanted to produce their shows, and they said no. They had their own producers, but they knew me, they liked me, but I couldn't produce their shows. Well, I knew from going to fashion shows in Europe and here in New York, as an editor, I was the editor of Ebony magazine as well as the commentator for the Ebony Fashion Fair. I could go backstage. I was much thinner in those